Hello, everyone. Don Sweet here. Today, I want to talk about the Nord Stream sabotage. I know this is a topic that's being hit a lot, but there's a little skew that I want to go into that people don't seem to be talking about a lot. A few reporters have asked about it, and I think that's great, but it just hasn't been hit quite as much as it needs to be. All right, so first let's introduce the speakers. So obviously we've got President Joe Biden, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, Department of State spokesperson Ned Price, and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. These are going to be the clips that I'm going to be using. The clips from Biden are all going to be from February 7th. From Jean-Pierre are all going to be from September 28th, same with Ned Price. And then from Anthony Blinken, they're all going to be September 30th. So just keep that in kind of frame of mind. This is chronological order, more or less, up top. But then down below, I'm going to kind of mix and match to make it clear what exactly I'm talking about. So first of all, we've got President Biden. Biden wants to talk about Nord Stream 2, and this is what he had to say.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
So obviously that clip's been circulating a lot. It does sound a little bit foreboding, especially now in hindsight that we know that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline seems to have been sabotaged. It certainly seems like he was threatening that in some way or another. Let's listen what the White House press secretary has to say about those allegations.
The opportunity to respond to something that was tweeted out today by the Russian government that said Joe Biden threatened to end Nord Stream. POTUS must give a definitive answer whether the United States acted on its threat on September 25th and 26th. Now, an administration official has called that absurd, but I just wanted to give you a chance to respond on the podium.
So, look, the president said that NS2 wouldn't become operational, and we would work with Germany on that. And he was right, because Germany took the step in February to freeze it, which was widely reported by all of you. And so that is what the president was talking about at that time.
But just broadly to the allegation that they're making online, somehow the U.S. is responsible.
No.
Okay.
All right, so real quick, she's basically saying that, what Biden was saying wasn't a threat that we were going to do something about it to blow it up. It was just a threat that we were going to make sure through diplomacy and allies that they weren't going to use Nord Stream 2. Okay, fine. And then when she was asked specifically about allegations that we were responsible, she gave a flat no. So a very clear flat no, a denial that we were responsible. All right. So now we're going to jump ahead, same day, but this is going to be the spokesman, Ned Price, and hear what he has to say about U.S. involvement and exactly how he categorizes it, which is interesting. So listen to this, and then I'll talk more.
To clarify that, the idea that the United States was in any way involved in the apparent sabotage of these pipelines is preposterous. It is nothing more than a function of Russian disinformation and should be treated as such.
So interesting on two things. Not only is he calling it Russian disinformation, but then he's saying, and should be treated as such. Now, again, we have a history with social media specifically about how the government intends for them to treat Russian disinformation. Again, stories that they flag as Russian disinformation either get reduced distribution on those platforms or they get censored completely. Again, which is this unholy combination of Fed and private industry, which we can talk about another day, which makes the whole censorship topic much more confusing. But we're not getting to the censorship part now. We're getting into his motives. Why would he specifically go out of his way to call it Russian disinformation? Now, again, it's not that Russia is the only one saying this. Many people think it's very reasonable that the United States would have been involved, since it seems to be in our best interest to get rid of Nord Stream 2 or Nord Stream 1 so that Europe can't back out of their sanctions against Russia and make it happen. But his push to use words like preposterous and Russian disinformation are interesting. They are denials, but they are denials in the manner that we have heard him specifically deny things in the past that ended up not being accurate, let's say. All right, so now let's hear another denial. This one's going to be from Secretary Blinken.
We are supporting the investigation into these attacks on the pipelines and working to be able to determine who's responsible, but I don't want to get ahead of those investigations. That work is ongoing. I think everyone by now is well aware of something that Melanie alluded to more broadly, but specific to Russia, which is the outrageous misinformation and disinformation campaigns that it engages in. So I really have nothing to say to the absurd allegation from President Putin that we or other partners or allies are somehow responsible for this. But we will get to the bottom of what happened, and we'll share that information as soon as we have it. But I don't want to get ahead of the investigation that's ongoing.
So just as a quick aside, he calls Russia's misinformation and disinformation campaigns outrageous, as though they were morally repugnant, which I actually agree with. But what he doesn't mention is that the United States is actually engaging in those exact same forms of misinformation and disinformation campaigns, both at home and abroad. And so him to weigh in morally, but then to not seem to realize that we too are culpable is, in my opinion, dishonest. All right. But the bigger piece of information is, again, that's three very clear denials from three White House officials. So we got a denial from the White House press secretary, from the Department of State, and from the Secretary of State. All three of them explicitly denied our involvement. Okay, great. So now let's go on. So now we hear the most important questions. I absolutely love these reporters because they asked the right questions. Let's hear what they asked.
What type of responses should we expect, given how important that asset is to the region?
So, as I just mentioned before, it's going to take some time to see who is behind this, and so there's a investigation underway. I will say that attacks on critical infrastructure of our European and NATO allies is a matter of concern for us, and we will continue to be vigilant on this and coordinate with our allies and partners. But again, the investigation, as we understand it, is going to take some time, and it's underway.
All right, so she says that we have to figure out who's behind it and that it's a matter of concern. But the question was, what would the appropriate response to be? Well, that it doesn't actually matter who did it. It doesn't matter if it was Russia or the United States or Iran or North Korea or who the heck knows. But the answer is something of this level of magnitude should have an appropriate level of response, right? It should be that the crime fits the punishment. It shouldn't be that it depends who the person is that committed the crime, and then we can decide what a fitting punishment would be. And the reason I bring this up is because the way she's weaseling out of this, it's a matter of concern. She's minimizing it, which could imply that the United States may be responsible, but it's like when you ask a kid what their own punishment should be. They'll go, maybe I should have to be in my room for 30 minutes by myself and play with Legos or watch stuff on the iPad. Those are culpable tells, right? She's saying that she's almost minimizing how big a concern it is, even though the reporter was asking, what should the appropriate response be? This is the question that should matter. We should get everyone to commit to say, hey, the appropriate level of response should be X. I think, personally, that the appropriate level of response, if somebody gave the order to blow up Nord Stream 1, should be that head of state should have to resign. Should also be that we have to pay for the repairs. And then lastly, there should probably be some sort of sanctions against whatever country did it, right? That's kind of a minimum of what an appropriate response would be. And it doesn't matter who did it, if it's US, if it's the United States, if it's Russia, if it's Iran, if it's somebody else. I'm just throwing out countries at this point, but it doesn't matter who did it. I mean, for Pete's sakes, let's say New Zealand had some crazy operation and they did it. It doesn't matter. They blew up the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And if that's the case, the punishment should be the same regardless of who you are. Okay, I'm going to go in here. I'm talking a little bit too much, but here's Jean-Pierre again. In that same interview, again stressing that we have to see who's behind it first.
Whoever attacked the pipeline, and it may take a while to figure out who it was, would the U.S. consider that to qualify as an attack on a NATO ally worthy of retaliation?
So I don't want to get ahead of the investigation. We have to see who is behind this at this time. I understand the question because it is a pipeline. And it is going to affect certainly our NATO allies. But we want to see where the investigation goes. Again, an attack on critical infrastructure of our European allies and our European partners and NATO allies is a matter of concern for us. But we will be there, and we will be ready to react once we have the investigation is completed.
I mean, is it just me, or is that matter of concern line so suspicious sounding? I mean, if my kid told me, oh, it's a matter of concern, I'm sorry, I think that kid did it, right? She's dodging the question. She doesn't want to answer directly. When they asked her, hey, isn't this an act of war, basically? Shouldn't whatever country did this have the full force of NATO down their throat, right? And she wants to say, oh, it's a matter of concern. Again, it doesn't matter who did this. If the United States did it, if Russia did it, if some random other third country did it, we have to consider this response in one specific lens. We can't vary the lens based on who did it. And she clearly wants to minimize it. Now, I'm not saying that the full force of NATO is necessarily what's justified for this, but the point is that it shouldn't matter who did it. The response should be the same. All right, now, not only is her answer shady, but here we got some shadiness from Secretary Blinken. So if you listen to Blinken and the way he describes this, it's a little hard to just think that we're a disinterested third party that clearly has no motive. Let's listen.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to, once and for all, remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for...
So again, a little shady, but I also want to focus on the part that he was talking about, the fact that Russia is weaponizing energy, which means that just them turning off the pipeline was a weaponization of energy, at least in the eyes of Secretary Blinken. Now, doesn't that mean that anyone who bombed Nord Stream 1, which was the pipeline that was destroyed, anybody who blew that up, shouldn't that be at least as much of a weaponization, right? If Russia just turning the valve off is a weaponization, then what is blowing it up? Is that not a weaponization? Certainly seems like it. And then the tremendous opportunity that it provides is that we are like the largest exporter of liquid natural gas. A lot of times you'll hear LNG, and they keep talking about that, but that means liquid natural gas. And so basically this natural gas pipeline from Russia, we want to replace with our supplies of liquid natural gas. Now you could say that there's altruism there because we want to, make sure that Europe has enough energy over the winter, and I'm sure that some of that is true. But again, it's market principles. We want to sell liquid natural gas, and this presents an opportunity to do it. Now again, if we are the ones responsible for Nord Stream 1 going out of commission, how is that not more weaponizing than Russia turning it off? All right. Now, some more shady stuff. There's a talking point that both Jean-Pierre and Blinken go to. I'm going to play it first, both of them, and then I'll talk about it.
So we have been in touch with our European partners there about the apparent sabotage of the pipelines. We are supporting European efforts to investigate this. As we just kind of laid out, it's still under investigation. As you all know, these pipelines were pumping gas into Europe, are not pumping gas into Europe at this time. Nord Stream 2 was never operational, and NS1 has been shut down for weeks because of how Russia is weaponizing energy.
Assessment of that.
No assessment as of yet. The investigation is still underway, and it could take some time, so just letting you all know what we expect that it will take some time.
So again, we hear some of these catchphrases. We hear, weaponizing energy. We hear that Nord Stream 1 was shut down and not pumping gas at this time. And we hear that Nord Stream 2 was never operational. Listen and see if you can fill out your bingo card on this one.
I think first it's important to make clear that these pipelines, that is Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, were not pumping gas into Europe at this time. Nord Stream 2 never became operational.
Bingo!
This is well known. Nord Stream 1 has been shut down for weeks.
Bingo!
Because of Russia's weaponization of energy.
Bingo! Okay, we got 4 in a row. Connect 4. Now, again, it is commonplace, even if you're an honest actor, to have talking points, right? Everybody has talking points. They issue them out to everybody. I get that. Jean-Pierre was given the same talking points as Blinken. Okay, fine. But isn't that a little suspicious? Why does it matter if we were not pumping gas into Europe at this time? Why does that matter? I'll tell you why it matters. And this is the part that is the most suspicious out of everything. Why on earth would an innocent party focus on this? Why? It makes no sense. It's not something that we should talk about. And yet Blinken stressed that this was important. He said that it was important to realize that they were not pumping gas. And that is because let's say, if it turns out that the United States was culpable for having destroyed NS1, this is our fallback to say, oh, well, it wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't like we were trying to do something that could have had horrible results. It wasn't like we were actually blowing up a functional pipeline. We were blowing up a pipeline that was already off. So, I mean, does that even count? What on earth? This is one of the most crooked phrases that just screams that we are guilty. This, coupled with Jean-Pierre's statement that we have to see who's behind this, and that it's a matter of concern. Those things coupled together make me think that we are not being told the truth. Now, maybe it wasn't us per se. Maybe it wasn't Ally. Or maybe it was just something that we had foreknowledge of and we decided to let it go through. But something is afoot. And they are not telling us the whole story because it certainly sounds like they are lying through their teeth. So I hope that we keep pushing. I hope these reporters ask more questions. I hope they really press them. And most importantly, I hope we keep asking for what the appropriate response should be. This is the most important piece. We need to back the United States into a corner and say, hey, United States, if there's a bully picking on a kid at school, what should the appropriate response be? And then we need to get them to write a document and sign it and say, this is the appropriate response to that bully. And then we need to say, okay, that means, United States, if you do that same bullying, we will do these same responses to you. Because right now it is the Wild West in this playground, and the United States is the biggest bully out there, and we keep lying to our own people and trying to tell us that we're not doing propaganda, we're not picking on people, and we are not committing acts of war and terror abroad. And none of those things are true. We have a government that is out of control, and it needs to be reined in by the people. Please join me in doing that. And as always, stay free, my friends.